I'm going to start with you, Sally, and just what was your personal, like, what made you want to tell Ken's story? What was the first thing that sort of made you say, this needs to be done, and this needs to be done by me?
I'm not sure if I made that decision. Chris came to me to start with, and it sounded like an extraordinary story. The moment where I was truly moved by Ken himself, I was in the Schomburg Museum listening to some of the tapes, the few that had been digitized, and Ken was interviewing the people on the streets of the Selma to Montgomery March. And I guess the dignity and the poise that he showed and the respect for both sides of that issue at the time, there was, I guess it gave me goosebumps. And that was really what swung it for me. Yeah. And
can I ask sort of about the amazing archive that is drawn from the film? So can you talk a little bit about, for both of you, in terms of how long it took and sort of where all that came from, and sort of the challenges that you had in sort of gathering that material and telling the story through mostly archival footage?
Chris, do you want to talk about the beginning of the archive, just sort of what you guys had to do to get it into the hands of the New York Public Library?
Sure. Well, maybe go back to kind of the genesis of the film, and it was a few years ago. Ken was 10 years older than myself, and slightly more than my sister Suki's in the back, and less for my sister Ariane. And we wanted to do something for his 80th birthday, so kind of a, get this out. And we missed it by a few years, but because it turned out to be a longer and harder project for Sally to do. But getting one of the original things for me, just kind of personally, about doing the movie was, since my brother was 10 years older, think about a 20-year-old playing with a 10-year-old. It doesn't exactly happen. And so I didn't really know my brother until he'd come back from Europe, and I had started in the film business, strangely myself, and we started collaborating. He did a project for me, but as time went on, as it got to being his 80th coming along, I decided that with my sisters that I really wanted to know more about him. And we had seen Sally had done a brilliant, in my opinion, documentary of a friend of ours in New Jersey, Betty Merck, and that's where we met. And we really loved the work that she had done. And so in talking with Ariane and Suki, the idea was let's do something for our brother, for Kenny. And we approached Sally, and really, outside of being maybe moral support for Sally, the film is 100% hers. And so the archive, when Ken was gone, we had this kind of massive, we all lived, and you saw the house that we grew up in New Jersey, and on the third floor of the house was, I don't know, we all had our rooms. When we moved out, Mom and Pop never made us take our stuff. And so on the third floor was kind of Kenny's museum, if you will, and his stuff was there for a long time. But then time went along, we had to sell the house. Mom and Pop sold the house, and so I think it was at Mom's suggestion or Pop's suggestion that we kind of archive this, and it ended up then at the New York Public Library. That's a long answer to a short question.
Totally fitting. And in terms of going through that archive and sort of finding the shape of the film, talk a little bit about that process. I mean, it's already been alluded that it took a little longer than expected, but what was that for you, and how did you find the shape of what you wanted to how you wanted to represent Ken?
Yeah, in a way, it was kind of a gift that it did take longer than anticipated, because I was able to with the wonderful help of nearly everyone here, maybe, interviewing and speaking with them, people that knew Ken, which of course I never had the privilege. So I was really guided a lot by the interviews that we did together. And as all that was happening, the New York Public Library was frantically digitizing 600 reels of NAGRA recordings, a lot of which, Ken was such a everything was about the other. And so actually finding him in the tapes was really difficult. We have Juan, who in his here when he was, I think, 19, high school, transcribed a ton of them. So we at least knew what was on some of them. I've since gone through and transcribed a ton more. But it was really a challenge, and it was a combination of the interviews and the recordings, finding Ken, trying to find out what was important to him by listening to maybe what he didn't say, what he said. Yeah, and also the private archives of a lot of people here contributed a lot.
Yeah. In the beginning of the film, that wonderful bite of somebody having such a huge impact and then falling off the radar. How did that happen? How did his name, how is it not blazoned everywhere?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one that on the one hand I wanted to explore, and then on the other it was almost happenstance. It was so many things coming together in a way that kind of mitigated his name getting out there. And it really wasn't any one person or any one thing, so it became quite a difficult subject to deal with. It's a really interesting question, and I have to say a big thank you in a way to the women in Ken's life, because they to some degree became his historian, and they brought a lot of their archive to me, and had it not been for them, there's a lot of this that wouldn't be told. But in terms of being recognized, I think Carol Lee acknowledged it, that a lot of his work was done in Europe. It didn't really translate. He really brought people together in a way at the expense of his own brand, and if you will. And so the work to me came across as though it meant more to him than like branding his name on history. That's sort of one aspect anyway.
And I think the other is that it's in happenings, they're an event and then they're gone. Everybody goes, off in their different directions. And as paintings, there's a painting, or sculptures, there's a sculpture. Playwrights, there's a written, a screenplay and so forth, and film. But with Kenny, with happenings, these collaborators came together and then, gone. And there's nothing to collect, there's nothing to sell, and there's no brand to promote, if you will. Is my sense of it, possibly.
And sort of that ephemerality, I guess, to a lot of the work that, not all the work, but a lot of the work that he did. How did you, at what point did you know how you're going to represent that, and how much of Ken you could put into it versus what other people were saying about Ken to sort of represent that aspect of his work?
Yeah, interesting question. I was really driven not to use narration, to try and get as close to Ken as I could, and not assert any of my own interpretations. One, assuming that they would largely be wrong. But also I felt that the wisdom of Ken's wonderful friends who spent time with him, who knew the essence of him, his family, that seemed to be something really I wanted to give a chance to come through. And even though it was sparse, even though there's a ton of archive to go through, the pieces that we fell on and the pieces that ended up in the film, in a way, are just the ones where we had something to show. Because there's so many other stories that are fantastic, but